I'm laying off 37 people today, CEO Victoria Sterling said quietly, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor. So why can't I stop thinking about the one man I barely know? Outside, a cold November rain painted silver streaks across downtown Chicago, turning the city into a blur of headlights and reflections. Inside Sterling Dynamics headquarters, tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The company had posted its worst quarter in nearly a decade. Investors were nervous. Board members were demanding cuts. And by 9 o'clock that morning, dozens of careers would change forever. Victoria stood alone in the executive conference room, her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass. At 38 years old, she had everything most people dreamed of: a billion-dollar company, a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a private jet waiting at Midway Airport. Yet the silence that greeted her every night felt larger than all of it. "Ms. Sterling, they're ready," her assistant said softly from the doorway. Victoria nodded once. "Let's begin." One by one, employees entered the conference room. Some were shocked, some angry, some simply numb. Victoria delivered each conversation with professionalism and respect. She never enjoyed these moments, despite what people assumed. Every name on her list represented a family, a mortgage, a future. But difficult decisions were part of leadership. By noon, 37 positions had been eliminated. The hallways felt quieter. The building itself seemed to exhale. Then Victoria noticed a familiar name still sitting on the final report. Ethan Brooks, operations coordinator, hired only 6 months earlier. Not a senior executive, not a top performer on paper, not someone the board would notice. Yet his name remained untouched. Victoria frowned. Why is Brooks still here? The HR director glanced up. "You approved his retention personally last night." Victoria stared at the document. She remembered doing it. She simply couldn't explain why. Ethan Brooks wasn't extraordinary by corporate standards. He drove an aging Ford pickup with over 200,000 miles on the odometer. He wore the same 2 jackets all winter. He never stayed late networking with executives. He never promoted himself. In fact, most people barely noticed him. Yet somehow, every department he touched functioned better. Problems disappeared. Deadlines were met. Conflicts settled down. And he never asked for recognition. "Keep him," Victoria said finally. The HR director nodded and left. A few minutes later, Victoria stepped onto the operations floor. Employees sat quietly behind glowing monitors. The atmosphere felt fragile, uncertain. Then she saw him. Ethan Brooks stood near a workstation helping a younger employee solve a scheduling issue. His voice was calm, his posture relaxed. There was no sign of fear, no desperate attempt to protect his position. Just quiet focus. "You'll be okay," Ethan told the employee. "One step at a time." The young man nodded, visibly relieved. Victoria watched from across the room. Something about Ethan always felt different. Not impressive in the way executives admired. Not charismatic. Not ambitious. Just steady, like an anchor in rough water. Ethan looked up unexpectedly and noticed her. "Good afternoon, Miss Sterling." "Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks." He smiled politely before returning to work. No nervousness, no flattery, no effort to impress her. Victoria continued walking, but the brief exchange lingered in her thoughts. Most people wanted something from her. Promotions, approval, access. Ethan never seemed to want anything at all, and for reasons she couldn't understand, that made him impossible to forget. By the end of that day, 37 employees were gone. The board was satisfied. Investors were reassured. The crisis had been contained. Yet as darkness settled over Chicago and office lights reflected against the rain-soaked streets below, Victoria found herself staring once more at a single name on her desk. Ethan Brooks. She had saved his job without knowing exactly why. What she didn't know was that this quiet single father was about to change far more than her company. He was about to change her life. The following Monday arrived wrapped in cold gray clouds and the smell of fresh rain drifting between the skyscrapers of downtown Chicago. By 7 o'clock in the morning, the offices of Sterling Dynamics were already coming alive. Elevators chimed. Coffee machines hummed. Computer screens flickered awake. Yet Ethan Brooks was not thinking about quarterly reports or executive meetings. He was standing in a small kitchen 20 miles away, packing a lunchbox covered in faded cartoon stickers. "Do not forget your science project today," he reminded Lily as she sat at the table eating oatmeal. "I will not," she said with a grin. You already reminded me 3 times. Ethan smiled. Then I am doing my job. Lily rolled her eyes dramatically. You worry too much. That is also my job. Her laughter filled the tiny apartment, warm and bright against the chilly morning. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to enjoy the sound. Moments like these mattered more than anything else. More than titles. More than money. More than recognition. An hour later, he arrived at Sterling Dynamics carrying a worn messenger bag and a travel mug filled with homemade coffee. Around him, employees hurried through the lobby discussing promotions, budget changes, and office rumors. The recent layoffs still lingered in every conversation. People were nervous. People were watching. People were trying to protect themselves. Ethan simply headed to his desk. By mid-morning, a problem surfaced inside the logistics department. A software error threatened to delay shipments to several major clients. Managers crowded around conference tables. Voices grew tense. Deadlines loomed. We need an answer now, one supervisor said. Who approved this system update? Another demanded. Frustration spread through the room like static electricity. Ethan listened quietly from the corner. He reviewed the data. He checked the update history. Then he spoke. The issue is not the software. Several heads turned. Then what is it? Someone asked. Ethan pointed to a scheduling conflict buried deep inside the system. The update exposed a problem that already existed. Fix the conflict and the delays disappear. The room fell silent. A few minutes later, they tested his solution. It worked. Just like that, the crisis began to fade. Nice catch, the supervisor admitted. Ethan nodded politely and returned to his desk before anyone could continue the conversation. No celebration. No speech. No attempt to take credit. On the top floor, Victoria Sterling received a summary of the incident before lunch. She read the report twice. Then a third time. Who solved it? She asked. Ethan Brooks, her assistant replied. Victoria leaned back slowly. Did he request recognition? No. A bonus? No. Anything? Nothing. Victoria looked out her office window toward the distant shoreline of Lake Michigan. The city stretched endlessly beneath the pale winter sky. Most people chased attention. Most people wanted rewards. Most people wanted to be seen. Yet the man she had saved during layoffs seemed completely uninterested in any of it. Later that afternoon, she passed through the operations floor and noticed Ethan gathering his belongings. The clock read exactly 5 o'clock. Not 5:15. Not 5:30. Exactly 5. Leaving early? One employee joked. Ethan smiled. No. Leaving on time. The employee laughed. Big plans. Ethan slipped on his jacket. My daughter has a school presentation. The answer was simple. Honest. Unapologetic. As Ethan walked toward the elevators, Victoria watched from across the room. For reasons she could not explain, she found herself following his movement until the elevator doors closed. Then she looked away quickly, almost annoyed with herself. Yet a strange thought lingered in her mind long after he had gone. Ethan Brooks never acted like he was trying to build a career. He acted like he was trying to build a life. And somehow, that difference was becoming impossible for her to ignore. Wednesday morning arrived with clear skies and a sharp wind rolling off Lake Michigan. Sunlight spilled across the glass towers downtown, reflecting in bright flashes against the windows of Sterling Dynamics. Inside the executive offices, however, warmth was in short supply. Victoria Sterling had built a reputation that reached every floor of the company. Employees respected her. Investors admired her. Competitors feared her. But very few people actually knew her. Meetings started exactly on time. Deadlines were non-negotiable. Excuses rarely survived more than 30 seconds in her presence. By 10 o'clock that morning, she was seated at the head of a long conference table reviewing projections for the upcoming quarter. Around her sat department heads nervously flipping through reports. This forecast is unrealistic, Victoria said. Revise it. A manager swallowed hard. We believe the numbers were achievable. Belief is not a strategy, Victoria replied calmly. The room fell silent. Pens stopped moving. Eyes dropped toward spreadsheets. Nobody argued. Nobody pushed back. That was usually how these meetings ended. Yet halfway through the discussion, a problem surfaced involving operational costs that affected multiple divisions. The conversation became tangled. Managers blamed one another. Numbers contradicted earlier reports. The tension in the room thickened. Victoria listened for several minutes before speaking. Who has the correct data? No one answered immediately. Then a voice came from the far end of the table. I do. Heads turned. Ethan Brooks sat quietly with a folder in front of him. He had only been invited because his department handled part of the affected workflow. Most executives had barely noticed he was there. Victoria looked at him. Go ahead. Ethan opened the folder. The numbers are not wrong. They are incomplete. He slid several pages across the table. These projections assume current vendor pricing remains unchanged for 12 months. That contract expires in 68 days. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Ethan continued. If renewal costs are factored in, the entire forecast changes. The room became very still. One manager reviewed the documents. Another checked his laptop. Within moments it became clear Ethan was right. A mistake that could have cost the company millions had been sitting in front of everyone. Yet only one person had noticed. Victoria studied him carefully. Most employees would have delivered the correction defensively or with pride. Ethan sounded almost apologetic for interrupting. Why did nobody catch this? Victoria asked. Nobody answered. Ethan finally shrugged slightly. Everyone was focused on this quarter. The contract affects next year. A faint smile touched the corner of Victoria's mouth. It disappeared almost immediately. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. You are welcome. That was it. No speech. No attempt to impress the room. The meeting moved on. Later that afternoon, Victoria stepped into the employee cafe for coffee. The space buzzed with quiet conversations and the scent of roasted beans. Near a window, she spotted Ethan sitting alone reviewing reports. Most people straightened when they noticed the chief executive officer approaching. Ethan simply looked up and nodded. Good afternoon, Ms. Sterling. Good afternoon. She glanced at the empty chair. May I? Of course. She sat. Several nearby employees pretended not to stare. Victoria wrapped her hands around a paper coffee cup. You were helpful this morning. Ethan nodded. Just doing my job. Most people would have made sure everyone knew it. He looked mildly confused. Why? Victoria almost laughed at the sincerity of the question. Recognition matters. Ethan glanced toward the city skyline beyond the window. Some things matter more. Such as, for a moment, he seemed to consider the answer. Going home knowing you helped solve a problem. Victoria watched him quietly. It was such a simple statement. Yet nobody in her world seemed to speak that way anymore. Titles mattered. Status mattered. Visibility mattered. Ethan measured success differently. A few seconds passed in comfortable silence. Then Ethan checked his watch and stood. I should get back to work. Of course. He nodded politely and walked away. Victoria remained seated long after he left. Around her, conversations resumed and coffee machines hissed softly. But her attention stayed fixed on one strange realization. For the first time in years, she had met someone who seemed completely unimpressed by her power. And instead of offending her, it made her want to understand him even more. The following Friday began like any other. The elevators moved steadily. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked beneath fluorescent lights. Yet by noon, something unusual happened. Ethan Brooks received a call. From Lily's school. Not an emergency. Not a problem. Her after-school science club had been canceled unexpectedly, and she would need to stay with him at the office for a few hours until he finished work. Only if it is allowed, Ethan said. Of course, the school secretary replied. We already spoke with her. She is excited. By 3 o'clock, Lily stepped into Sterling Dynamics carrying a pink backpack nearly half her size and a science project protected inside a cardboard display case. Her blue eyes widened immediately. This place is huge. Ethan smiled. Remember the rules. Be polite. Good. Do not touch expensive things. Very good. And definitely do not become a billionaire before dinner. Ethan laughed softly. That one is optional. Lily grinned and followed him through the operations floor. Employees smiled as she passed. A few waved. Others complimented her project. Within minutes, she seemed completely comfortable. Something about children often changed the atmosphere of a room. The stress felt lighter. The conversations felt warmer. Even the fluorescent lights seemed less harsh. Upstairs, Victoria Sterling was reviewing reports when she noticed movement through the glass walls overlooking part of the operations area. A small girl stood beside Ethan's desk, carefully coloring in a notebook. Victoria paused. Who is that? She asked. Her assistant looked down. Ethan Brooks's daughter. Victoria glanced back toward the floor below. For reasons she could not explain, she found herself continuing to watch. Around 4 o'clock, she headed downstairs for another meeting. As she passed through the operations department, a voice suddenly stopped her. "Excuse me." Victoria turned. Lily stood there holding a marker. Ethan looked mildly horrified. "Lily." "Sorry," Lily said quickly. "I just wanted to ask something." Victoria crossed her arms gently. "What is it?" Lily pointed toward a framed magazine cover hanging on a nearby wall featuring Victoria. "Is that really you?" Several employees froze. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Victoria surprised everyone by smiling. "Yes, that is really me." Lily studied the picture. Then she studied Victoria. "You look happier in person." Silence followed. Nearby employees stared at their screens, pretending not to listen. Victoria blinked once. No executive, no investor, no journalist had ever said anything remotely similar. "Thank you," she replied quietly. Lily nodded, satisfied with the answer. "You are welcome." Ethan shook his head. "I apologize." Victoria looked at him. "For what?" "She says whatever she thinks." "That is becoming rare." Lily returned to coloring while Ethan resumed work. Victoria continued toward her meeting, but something lingered inside her chest. Later that evening, she found herself passing by Ethan's desk again. Most employees had already left. Lily sat nearby reading a library book while Ethan finished a report. Every few minutes, she looked up simply to make sure her father was still there. Every time, Ethan smiled back. It was a small exchange, barely noticeable. Yet Victoria stopped walking. Her company employed thousands of people. She owned homes she rarely visited. She traveled hundreds of thousands of miles every year. She attended galas, conferences, and private events across the country. Yet no one waited for her the way Lily waited for Ethan. No one looked at her as if her presence alone made the world feel safe. For the first time in years, Victoria felt something she could not easily categorize. It was not admiration. It was not curiosity. It was something quieter, something deeper. Looking at Ethan and Lily together, she realized there were forms of wealth that never appeared on financial statements. And suddenly, despite everything she owned, she felt unexpectedly poor. The week after Lily's visit should have been routine. Instead, it became one of the most difficult weeks Sterling Dynamics had faced in years. Early Monday morning, alarming reports began appearing across executive dashboards. A software integration scheduled to launch with one of the company's largest clients was failing. Delivery schedules were slipping. Customer support tickets were multiplying by the hour. Investors had not been informed yet, but everyone understood the truth. If the problem continued, the company could lose a contract worth tens of millions of dollars. By 8:30, senior executives filled the main conference room. Screens glowed with red warning indicators. Coffee sat untouched beside stacks of reports. The atmosphere felt heavy. Victoria stood at the front of the room, studying the data. "How long until this affects client operations?" she asked. "Less than 48 hours, one executive replied. Another shook his head. "Maybe less." The room fell silent. No one had a clear solution. Meetings stretched into the afternoon. Consultants joined conference calls. Managers proposed temporary fixes. Every option seemed expensive, risky, or incomplete. As the hours passed, frustration began replacing confidence. Meanwhile, Ethan remained downstairs reviewing operational reports. He listened carefully as information flowed between departments. He asked questions. He took notes. Most importantly, he paid attention to details others overlooked. Shortly after 4 o'clock, he requested access to several archived implementation files. A manager frowned. "Why do you need those?" Ethan looked up calmly. "Because everyone is focused on the failure. I want to understand what was working before it failed." 2 hours later, Ethan knocked on the conference room door. Inside, exhausted executives sat surrounded by spreadsheets and projections. Victoria looked up immediately. "Mr. Brooks?" Ethan stepped forward carrying a thin folder. "I think the problem is smaller than everyone believes." Several executives exchanged skeptical looks. Ethan opened the folder. The integration itself is functioning correctly. The failure comes from a validation sequence added 3 months ago. One executive frowned. "We already reviewed that." Ethan nodded. "You reviewed the update. You did not review the original approval notes." He placed several documents on the table. The validation process was intended for a different client environment. It was never supposed to be applied here. The room became quiet. Victoria studied the documents. Then another executive reviewed them. Minutes passed. Finally, someone spoke. He is right. Heads turned. Another manager verified the findings. Then another. Slowly, the reality became undeniable. The crisis threatening the entire contract had been caused by a simple implementation error hidden beneath layers of assumptions. An error Ethan had uncovered because he looked where nobody else had thought to look. Relief spread through the room. Shoulders relaxed. Conversations softened. For the first time all day, people smiled. Victoria remained seated, studying Ethan. "How did you find it?" she asked. Ethan shrugged lightly. "I stopped looking for someone to blame and started looking for the truth." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that arrives when something important has been said. Later that evening, as employees prepared to leave, news of the solution spread throughout the building. Some praised Ethan openly. Others congratulated him in hallways. Ethan thanked them politely and continued working. No victory speech. No celebration. No attempt to stand in the spotlight. From her office window high above the city, Victoria watched him gather his belongings at exactly 5 o'clock. Then she saw him glance at a photo of Lily before slipping it carefully into his bag. In that moment, she understood something that many brilliant executives never learned. Ethan Brooks was not exceptional because he was smarter than everyone else. He was exceptional because his ego never got in the way of his character. And for reasons that unsettled her more each day, that realization stayed with Victoria long after the office lights began to fade across the Chicago skyline. Winter settled deeper over Chicago during the following weeks. The trees along the streets stood bare against pale skies, and a steady wind swept between the buildings each morning. Inside Sterling Dynamics, life returned to normal after the crisis. Deadlines were met. Clients were satisfied. Investors relaxed. Yet something had quietly changed. Victoria found herself noticing Ethan more often than she intended. Not because he sought attention. Quite the opposite. The less he seemed to care about being noticed, the more impossible it became to overlook him. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Victoria remained in her office reviewing reports. The city. Lights shimmered beyond the glass walls, reflecting across polished surfaces and empty hallways. She rubbed her eyes and glanced at the clock. Nearly 7:30. As she gathered papers from her desk, a folder slipped from a stack and landed on the floor. Several documents scattered across the carpet. Victoria bent down to collect them. One page caught her attention. It was part of an archived personnel file that had accidentally been included among executive reports. Ethan Brooks. She normally would have returned it immediately without reading further. Instead, her eyes stopped on a line near the center of the page. Former Senior Director of Operations. Victoria frowned. She continued reading. The position had been with a national logistics corporation. The salary had been several times higher than his current income. The career trajectory had been remarkable. Promotions, awards, leadership recognition. Then suddenly, 6 years earlier, everything stopped. Victoria sat back slowly. The timeline matched the year Ethan's wife had passed away. Curiosity gave way to something heavier. She opened another document attached to the file. A former supervisor described Ethan as one of the most promising executives in the company. Another recommendation letter praised his strategic thinking and leadership. One sentence lingered in her mind. He voluntarily stepped away from advancement opportunities to become the primary caregiver for his wife during her illness. Victoria stared at the page. Outside, snowflakes drifted softly through the darkness beyond the windows. The city seemed quieter somehow. The next afternoon, she passed Ethan's desk and noticed he had stepped away briefly. A small framed photograph sat beside his monitor. Ethan stood smiling beside a woman with warm eyes and chestnut hair. Between them was a much younger Lily holding both their hands. Victoria had seen the picture before, but never truly looked at it. Something rested beneath the frame. A folded piece of paper worn at the edges from years of handling. She hesitated. Then she noticed several handwritten words visible near the fold. It was not a private secret deliberately hidden away. It looked more like a reminder left close at hand. Her eyes drifted across a single sentence. "Give Lily the life we dreamed for her." Victoria stepped back immediately. She did not read another word. She did not need to. A few minutes later, Ethan returned carrying coffee. He noticed her standing nearby. "Everything okay?" he asked. Victoria nodded. "Yes." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she surprised herself. "Your wife must have been remarkable." Ethan looked toward the photograph. The expression on his face softened. She was. Silence followed. Not painful silence. The kind carried by memory. Finally, Ethan smiled gently. She taught me that the people beside you matter more than the titles ahead of you. Victoria glanced toward the photograph once more, then back at Ethan. In boardrooms, she had met powerful people, wealthy people, influential people. Yet standing there beside that simple desk, she realized she was meeting something much rarer. A man who had willingly sacrificed success for love and responsibility. And for the first time, Victoria Sterling felt something deeper than admiration. She felt respect. January arrived with record cold temperatures across Chicago. Snow lined the sidewalks in uneven piles, and gray clouds hung low over the city for days at a time. Inside Sterling Dynamics, preparations were underway for the company's annual leadership summit, one of the most important events of the year. Executives, investors, and major clients would all attend. Months of planning had gone into the event. Everything appeared ready. Then, 3 days before the summit, disaster struck. A senior vice president named Richard Lawson abruptly resigned. At first, the announcement seemed shocking but manageable. By lunchtime, however, the truth began to emerge. Several confidential client negotiations had been mishandled. Critical project information had been withheld from leadership. Financial forecasts presented during previous meetings contained serious inaccuracies. The deeper investigators looked, the worse it became. By Tuesday afternoon, the executive floor felt like a ship navigating through fog. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Victoria sat through meeting after meeting attempting to assess the damage. She remained calm on the surface, but exhaustion crept into her eyes. For years, she had trusted Richard. He had been one of her closest advisors. Now she was discovering how much of that trust had been misplaced. "How long have these issues existed?" she asked during one emergency session. No one knew. "How many clients are affected?" Estimates varied. "Can we still proceed with the summit?" The room fell silent. For the first time in years, Victoria looked uncertain. Not weak. Not incapable. Simply alone. Late that evening, long after most employees had gone home, she remained in the executive conference room staring at a wall of reports. Snow tapped softly against the windows. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass like distant stars. The door opened quietly. Ethan stepped inside carrying a stack of updated operational summaries. "I thought everyone left," Victoria said without looking up. "Most people did." He placed the reports on the table. "You should go home." Victoria almost laughed. "That is not happening tonight." Ethan studied the room. Empty coffee cups. Scattered documents. A chief executive officer carrying the weight of an entire company by herself. "Then at least take a break," he said. 5 minutes. Victoria leaned back in her chair. "You know what surprises me?" Ethan waited. "When things go well, everyone wants credit." She glanced toward the reports covering the table. "When things go wrong, everyone disappears." Ethan nodded slowly. "Not everyone." The answer settled quietly between them. Outside, the snowfall thickened. The city seemed to disappear behind a curtain of white. Victoria looked at him carefully. Most people remained loyal to success. Ethan seemed loyal to people. There was a difference. The following morning, Ethan arrived before sunrise. While executives scrambled to repair relationships and rebuild plans, he coordinated departments, clarified communication channels, and helped stabilize operations. He did not have to. Nobody asked him to. Yet he moved through the chaos with steady purpose. By afternoon, several critical issues had already been resolved. Employees noticed. Managers noticed. Even board members noticed. But Ethan never changed. He spoke respectfully, worked quietly, shared credit freely. As the day ended, Victoria stood near her office window watching employees leave for the evening. Below, she saw Ethan walking toward the parking garage carrying the same worn messenger bag he carried every day. Before stepping outside, he stopped and pulled out his phone. A smile immediately appeared on his face. Victoria did not need to hear the conversation to know who was calling. Lily. For a moment she imagined what it must feel like to have someone waiting for you simply because they loved you. Not because of your title. Not because of your influence. Not because of your success. Just because you were you. And standing there alone in her corner office, overlooking an entire city, Victoria realized something that unsettled her more than any corporate crisis. The person she trusted most inside Sterling Dynamics was no longer an executive, a consultant, or a board member. It was Ethan Brooks. The annual leadership summit arrived beneath a sky the color of steel. Snow rested along the edges of downtown streets, and guests from across the country filled the grand ballroom of a historic Chicago hotel. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Conversations drifted through the air. Sterling Dynamics had survived its recent challenges, and on the surface everything appeared stable once again. Yet Victoria felt a quiet uneasiness she could not explain. Throughout the event, she found herself searching the crowd for one familiar face. Ethan moved through the day exactly as he always did. He helped coordinate schedules, solved last-minute problems, and made certain everything ran smoothly. Most attendees never noticed him. That was usually how he preferred it. Late that afternoon, as presentations concluded and guests gathered for networking sessions, Victoria finally found a moment to speak with him. "You helped save this event," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "A lot of people helped. You always say that." "Because it is true." The answer made her shake her head. Somehow, even now, he refused to place himself at the center of anything. Before she could say more, Ethan reached into his messenger bag and removed a sealed envelope. "Actually, there is something I need to give you." Victoria accepted it. "What is this?" Ethan's expression remained calm. "My resignation." For a second, she thought she had misunderstood. The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade around her. "Your what?" "My resignation." He spoke gently, respectfully, as if discussing an ordinary schedule adjustment. Victoria stared at the envelope in her hands. "Why?" Ethan glanced toward a nearby window where snow drifted softly beyond the glass. "People have started talking." She immediately understood. Employees had noticed her growing trust in him. Executives had noticed their conversations. Rumors had begun spreading through hallways and conference rooms. Ethan continued. "None of it bothers me." He paused. "But Lily hears things. Kids repeat what adults say." Victoria felt a heaviness settle inside her chest. "You are leaving because of gossip?" Ethan shook his head. "I am leaving because my daughter deserves peace." Silence followed. The kind of silence that arrives when there are no good arguments left to make. Victoria looked down at the envelope. Weeks earlier, she might have accepted it as a professional decision. Now it felt different. Now it felt personal. "Have you accepted another position?" she asked quietly. "Not yet." "Then stay." Ethan offered a sad smile. Sometimes the right decision still hurts. Across the ballroom, guests laughed and celebrated another successful event. Glasses clinked. Music played softly. Yet Victoria felt completely disconnected from all of it. For months, she had focused on company crises, investor concerns, and strategic goals. Somewhere along the way, something else had happened. Something she had never planned for. Ethan glanced at his watch. "I should go? Lily has a school concert tonight." Of course she does, Victoria thought. Because no matter what happened inside Sterling Dynamics, Ethan always knew where his priorities belonged. He extended his hand. "Thank you for the opportunity." Victoria looked at the hand, but did not take it immediately. For the first time in years, she felt powerless. Not because she lacked authority, not because she lacked resources, but because she could not convince one good man to stay. Finally, she shook his hand. "Thank you, Ethan." He nodded and walked away. Victoria remained standing in the center of the crowded ballroom, holding the resignation letter. Around her, hundreds of people celebrated success. Yet all she could think about was the one person who was leaving. And as the snow continued falling beyond the hotel windows, Victoria Sterling realized a truth she could no longer ignore. She was not afraid of losing an employee. She was afraid of losing Ethan Brooks. 3 days after the leadership summit, Ethan's final day arrived. The morning sky over Chicago was bright for the first time in weeks. Sunlight reflected off fresh snow, turning the city streets into ribbons of gold and white. Inside Sterling Dynamics, employees stopped by Ethan's desk throughout the day. Some thanked him. Some wished him luck. Others simply shook his hand. Ethan accepted every kind word with quiet gratitude. By 4:30 that afternoon, most of his belongings had already been packed into a single cardboard box. A framed photo of Lily, a few notebooks, several pens. The life he had built inside the company fit into one small container. At exactly 5 o'clock, he walked through the lobby for the last time. The revolving doors turned slowly behind him. The cold air greeted his face. And just like that, he was gone. The following week felt strangely different. The company continued operating. Meetings continued. Reports continued. Clients continued calling. Yet something important was missing. Victoria noticed it everywhere. Problems still got solved, but not with the same calm confidence. Conversations felt louder. Decisions felt heavier. More than once she found herself looking toward Ethan's empty desk before remembering it no longer belonged to him. Then came Friday evening, the annual winter concert at Lily's elementary school. Ethan sat near the middle of the auditorium surrounded by parents carrying flowers, cameras, and winter coats. Children filled the stage beneath warm lights. Excited voices echoed through the room. The smell of hot chocolate drifted from a refreshment table near the entrance. For the first time in months, Ethan felt completely at peace. Lily stood with her classmates, searching the audience until she spotted him. The moment she did, her face lit up. Ethan smiled and waved. Then Lily suddenly froze. Her eyes widened. "Dad?" she whispered from the stage. Ethan followed her gaze toward the back of the auditorium. A woman stood near the entrance wearing a simple navy coat and no sign of corporate status. No assistants. No security. No executive entourage. Just Victoria Sterling. Ethan stared in surprise as she slowly walked down the aisle. Parents glanced at her curiously. Children continued preparing for the performance. The entire moment felt strangely unreal. Victoria stopped beside his row. "May I sit here?" Ethan nodded. "Of course." For several seconds neither spoke. The school principal welcomed families. Applause filled the room. Somewhere backstage a piano began warming up. Finally Victoria turned toward him. "I thought hiring you would help my company." Ethan looked at her quietly. She smiled through eyes that seemed brighter than usual. "Then I thought keeping you would help my company." A pause followed. Soft. Honest. Real. The children's choir began singing in the background. Their voices floated through the auditorium like sunlight. Victoria looked directly at him. "Somewhere along the way, I realized you were helping something much more important." Ethan did not speak. The room seemed to fade around them. "You reminded me what character looks like," she said softly. "You reminded me what family looks like." Her voice trembled slightly. "And you reminded me what matters when all the titles and accomplishments disappear." Tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Human tears. Honest tears. "The truth is, Ethan, I do not miss you because you were a great employee." The choir continued singing. Parents listened. Children smiled beneath bright lights. Yet for Ethan and Victoria, everything felt still. "I miss you because somewhere along the way, you became the person I trusted most." Silence followed. A beautiful silence. The kind that needs no applause. The kind that arrives when two hearts finally tell the truth. Then from the stage, Lily smiled at both of them. And in that simple moment, beneath the warm glow of an elementary school auditorium, surrounded by ordinary families and ordinary life, Victoria Sterling discovered a happiness that no boardroom, no fortune, and no corner office had ever been able to give her. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.